Hello and welcome back to our deep dive series, where we explore the sources you share with us. Today we're tackling something pretty significant that many of you sent over.
That's right. We've got several articles and a study looking into that huge power outage across the Iberian Peninsula and southern France back on April 28th, 2025. And also broader discussions about grid resilience.
Exactly. So our mission today is to really unpack this. We want to understand the potential causes of this massive blackout, look at the immediate consequences, and then zoom out a bit.
Right. Place it in the larger context of keeping our power grids reliable and, crucially, resilient against all sorts of threats.
We'll be digging into possible technical failures, the cyberattack hypothesis that emerged pretty quickly.
We'll also look at the immediate aftermath, drawing on that CNN and Español report, which gave a good snapshot of the chaos.
And finally, we'll connect it to the bigger picture grid resilience, especially with extreme weather on the rise, using insights from the Método Analítico study and a MITCO document. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the main event. The Iberian Peninsula blackout, April 28th, 2025. What do we know for sure about the initial situation?
Well, the first thing is that official investigations kicked off immediately. We're talking REE in Spain, RN in Portugal, plus national security agencies.
So, high-level involvement from the get-go.
Absolutely. And they were quick to emphasize the complexity, warning against jumping to conclusions. The initial estimates for getting power back were sobering.
How long were they saying?
They talked about maybe 6 to 10 hours just for basic recovery, but potentially up to a week for full normalization.
A week? Wow, that really underlines the scale of this thing.
It does. A week without full power for potentially millions. That's a major crisis scenario.
And what about the technical side? Any early clues about what might have failed?
The operators mentioned a few things, though specifics were scarce initially. REE, the Spanish operator, reported a very significant loss of generation.
Okay, so less power being produced, essentially.
Exactly. Like a major power plant, or several, suddenly going offline. RN in Portugal noted failures in critical 400 kV transmission lines.
Those are the big ones, right? The main arteries of the grid.
Precisely. High voltage lines carrying bulk power. Other possibilities floated were equipment malfunctions at substations, think of them as the grid's distribution hubs, or a cascading failure.
Ah, the domino effect. One thing goes wrong and takes other parts down with it.
That's the fear. And the sheer size of the power drop, around 11,000 megawatts, is just staggering. Some sources even called it an energy zero.
An energy zero? That sounds dramatic. What does that imply?
It suggests the system was hit so hard and so fast that perhaps the usual safeguards, the automatic protections designed to isolate problems, might have been overwhelmed or just couldn't contain it. It points to a potential underlying fragility, maybe.
Or that the safeguards weren't designed for this specific kind of massive disturbance.
That's certainly a possibility they'll be investigating. It really felt like the system's core was profoundly disrupted.
Which leads us directly to that other big question, the one that surfaced almost instantly. Could this have been a cyber attack?
Yeah, that hypothesis gained traction very quickly,
Yeah.
mainly because of the scale and the suddenness of the event.
It wasn't a gradual failure then?
Apparently not. And it became a major focus for investigation. We know Spain's CNI, their National Intelligence Center, and NCB, the Cybersecurity Institute, were actively looking into it.
And Portugal too?
Portuguese intelligence was involved as well, yes. There was one particularly concerning piece of information attributed to CNI.
What was that?
They reportedly detected large, unusual activity from North Africa in the days leading up to the blackout.
Okay, that definitely raises eyebrows. And
But
cyber attacks on critical infrastructure aren't exactly science fiction anymore, are they?
Not at all. They're a known, real threat globally. We've seen examples like the attacks on Ukraine's power grid, which were a stark reminder of the potential impact.
And Spain itself has specific protections in place.
Yes, they've had specific cyber protection protocols for critical infrastructure since 2021. Technically speaking, a cyber attack could involve gaining unauthorized access to the control systems.
The SCADA systems, right?
Exactly. The industrial control systems or SCADA systems that manage grid operations. If attackers get in, they could potentially manipulate switches, trigger shutdowns, or destabilize the grid enough to cause a widespread collapse.
So the technical means exists, the global threat is real, and there was this report of unusual activity. But how strong is the actual evidence linking that activity to this blackout?
And that's the crucial point where we need to be cautious. while the hypothesis is plausible and that unusual activity is noted in the sources.
There's no public confirmation or solid proof yet.
Correct. As of the sources we have, there's no publicly confirmed evidence directly linking that activity to the blackout. It remains speculation until a causal link is demonstrated.
Understood. So, a major question mark still hangs over the cause. Let's shift focus then to what we do know happened, the immediate impact on people's lives. That CNN and Español report gave us a glimpse.
It really did. It described how tens of millions across Spain and Portugal were plunged into darkness, prompting both governments to declare a state of emergency.
A state of emergency that signals how serious it was perceived.
Definitely. Power restoration started relatively quickly in some areas. The Spanish grid operator claimed 99% restoration by Tuesday morning, but the knock-on effects, especially on transport, lingered.
Right. I remember reading the transport minister warned about reduced train capacity, even high-speed rail.
Exactly. And in Portugal, power came back for most during Monday night. Apparently, there were even celebrations showing up on social media when the lights came back on.
I can imagine the relief. But before that, the disruption must have been immense.
Oh, absolutely huge. Businesses ground to a halt. People got trapped in elevators. Firefighters in Madrid alone responded to 174 elevator rescues.
174, just in Madrid.
Just in Madrid. Traffic lights went out, creating chaos. One description called Madrid like a jungle. Metro systems shut down completely. Airports faced major delays and cancellations.
What about essential services, like hospitals?
Thankfully, the report mentioned that hospitals in both countries activated their contingency plans and switched to backup generators. That's a positive sign of preparedness, at least in critical sectors.
That's vital. And the political reactions? Any finger pointing?
Well, Spain's President Sanchez acknowledged the uncertainty about the cause. Portugal's Prime Minister Montenegro suggested the problem didn't start in Portugal and likely originated in Spain.
Interesting. And RN, the Portuguese operator, made a point about imports.
Yes, João Faria Conceição from highlighted that Portugal was heavily impacted, partly because it was importing cheaper solar power from Spain that morning. When Spain went down, Portugal lost a major supply source and apparently lacked immediate alternative emergency options.
So it really shows the vulnerability of relying heavily on interconnected grids, especially during peak import times.
It does. The blackout hit major cities, hard 5. Madrid, Lisbon, Barcelona, Seville, Valencia, disrupting transport, finance, tourism. Everyday routines were thrown off.
Like needing cash because card machines were down?
Exactly. Cash became king again, temporarily. Police were manually directing traffic. Many businesses simply had to close.
And did it spill over borders beyond Portugal?
Yes. The French operator, RTE, reported a brief power cut in the French Basque Country, just across the border. So the ripple effect was definitely felt, even if briefly, in France too.
Okay, so this specific event, the Iberian Blackout, serves as a really stark case study, and it leads us perfectly into the broader discussion from our other sources, the resilience of electrical distribution systems in general.
Precisely. The Método Analítico study and the MITCO document really emphasize how increasing extreme weather events driven by climate change are posing a growing threat.
We're seeing more intense storms, heat waves, floods.
Exactly. And these events directly endanger critical infrastructure like the power grid. They cause physical damage, lead to prolonged outages, and have significant social and economic costs.
And the concern is that our current grids, while maybe reliable day to day, might not be built for these more severe future events.
That's the core issue. We need to think beyond just reliability, which is about preventing frequent, small outages, and focus on resilience.
Okay, define resilience in this context.
Resilience, as Edelat defines it, is the system's ability to absorb a major disruption and, crucially, recover rapidly from it. It's about bouncing back from the big hits.
And there are key aspects to that.
Yes. The sources mention 4 key properties.
Yeah.
Anticipation, seeing trouble coming and preparing. Absorption, withstanding the blow when it hits. Recovery, getting back online quickly. And adaptability, learning from events to get stronger for the next time.
So it's different from just being reliable.
Very different. Reliability is about high probability of success under normal conditions. Resilience is about how the system behaves under stress during those high-impact, low-frequency events. A resilient grid is usually reliable, but a reliable grid isn't necessarily resilient. It might crumble under major stress.
Does resilience also cover backup systems?
Yes, it includes ensuring critical services remain available, even if that means relying on backups for a time.
And investing in this? it pays off?
The sources argue strongly that it does. The World Bank estimated back in 2019 that every dollar invested in climate-resilient infrastructure could yield around $6 in benefits, avoided losses, faster recovery, etc. Delaying action just makes it more expensive later.
Can you give an example of a resilience investment?
Undergrounding power lines is a classic one. Higher initial costs for sure, but much less vulnerable to storms, high winds, or even fires. It saves money in the long run by avoiding repeated repairs and outages.
And this focus on resilience is also important for the energy transition, right? Integrating renewables.
Absolutely. The IEA highlighted this in 2021. Many renewables, like solar and wind, can be more variable or vulnerable to weather, so a resilient grid is essential to manage them effectively. But shifting focus requires regulators to step up.
How so?
They need to create the right incentives. The current focus is often purely on keeping immediate costs down, which doesn't always encourage long-term resilience investments. We need a paradigm shift from pure reliability to embracing resilience, and regulation is key to driving that.
Okay, let's bring this discussion to Latin America now. The sources point out specific vulnerabilities there.
Yes, Latin America is particularly exposed to a wide variety of high-impact events: earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, volcanoes, landslides. The map included in the sources shows flags across numerous countries facing these risks.
And we've seen the impact, haven't we?
Definitely. Think Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, the big snowfall in Santiago, Chile, earthquakes in Mexico, the nationwide blackout in Venezuela, major storms and floods in Brazil. These events have severely tested the electrical systems.
And the forecasts aren't great.
No. EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, projects an increase in severe storms and hurricane-related outages due to climate change. It really underscores the need for climate risk analysis to be central to energy planning in the region.
And different parts of the grid are vulnerable in different ways.
Exactly. That Table 1 in the study is interesting. Overhead lines, for instance, are highly vulnerable to storms and fires, maybe medium vulnerability to earthquakes. Substations are often highly vulnerable to quakes, storms, and floods.
So you need tailored solutions depending on the local risks.
Precisely. And environmental factors like temperature, soil conditions, they all play a role too. The consequences of these events are systemic: physical damage, long outages, operational chaos, and even long-term degradation of the infrastructure.
So, faced with this, how is Latin America progressing on building resilience? What are the monitoring, planning, and regulatory efforts?
Well, the sources suggest it's still early days for incorporating climate risk resilience directly into regulations in most Latin American countries.
Really? Despite the clear risks?
Yeah, there's some focus, like in Colombia and Ecuador, on diversifying generation, especially linked to El Niño impacts. But overall, the regulatory frameworks often prioritize cost efficiency and expanding coverage over building in resilience.
So, resilience might be mentioned in policy papers, but not yet translated into concrete rules or incentives?
Largely, yes. On the monitoring front, most companies track weather, but fewer have sophisticated climate risk analysis systems for long-term planning against extreme events. Colombia was mentioned as using databases, but maybe not specifically focused enough on the extremes.
What about emergency plans?
Contingency plans are crucial, and they are being implemented under regulatory guidance in places like Argentina, Brazil, and Peru.
Can you give an example?
Argentina's operative emergency plans, the POEs, sound quite comprehensive. They're mandatory, updated annually, detail specific actions for different scenarios, communication protocols, prioritizing restoration, handling long outages, using control centers, training staff, preventative maintenance, even running drills. The regulator, ENRE, reviews and approves them.
That sounds pretty robust.
It does. Brazil's ANEL also mandates contingency plans, including mobilizing equipment and coordinating with authorities. Chile requires annual plans for winter and high-temperature risks reported to their superintendents, and they also run earthquake response drills.
But you mentioned regulation often follows disasters.
That seems to be a pattern. Brazil's ANEL started a public consultation in 2024 specifically to improve resilience regulation after severe events in 2023. Puerto Rico formed its Resilience Task Force after Hurricane Irma.
So it's often reactive rather than proactive?
It appears so, and the sources suggest a need for more decisive, proactive regulatory development across the region. A key issue is that current quality of service regulations often don't incentivize resilience investments because of the potential impact on tariffs.
They focus on normal day-to-day reliability metrics.
Exactly. Things like the frequency and duration of common outages. They often exclude major interruptions from unexpected events. Chile and Brazil have introduced concepts like abnormal state or interruption in emergency situations to formally exclude these big events from standard quality calculations.
But Chile introduced something else, an index.
Yes, Chile introduced an Operational Flexibility Index, the FO, which measures service recovery within 30 minutes. That's noted as potentially the first direct resilience metric in the region's regulations.
What about responsibility and compensation when these major events happen? The force majeure or act of God clause?
That's a critical area. Defining force majeure clearly is essential. Portugal's regulator, ARSC, has set strict criteria. The event must be external, unpredictable, and irresistible. They also defined a major impact incident over 50 milliliters unserved, which requires a detailed report.
But does being a major impact incident automatically mean the operator isn't liable for compensation?
Not necessarily, according to the Portuguese model. It depends on whether the event was still somehow attributable to the operator's actions or lack thereof. It's a nuanced approach. ENTSOE in Europe also has guidelines for classifying events by severity to aid risk management.
Okay, so if we need more resilience, we need investment. How do we overcome the hurdles, like the focus on short-term costs, and encourage things like mutual aid?
This is where policy and regulation are absolutely key, because the market alone often won't deliver optimal resilience. There are market failures. The long-term benefits aren't always captured by the company making the investment. The social cost of outages is much broader than the utility's direct cost, and sometimes there isn't enough competitive pressure.
So what should regulators do?
The sources recommend implementing international best practices. This includes developing concrete action plans, creating methodologies to actually calculate resilience indices.
Going beyond just tracking standard outages.
Exactly. Bringing in criteria like wind speed thresholds, temperature extremes, rainfall intensity. Defining specific resilience indicators measuring robustness, recovery speed, adaptability. Think metrics like outage numbers for critical customers, how long critical services are down, recovery time percentages.
And the investment plans themselves.
They should categorize investments. Those reducing the impact magnitude, like physically hardening the infrastructure, and those minimizing recovery time, like automation and operational improvements. Think smart grids, undergrounding, better vegetation management, backup generation. Table 2 in the study lists many technologies.
And crucially, how are these paid for?
These plans need to be presented to regulators and explicitly recognized in tariff reviews. There should be clear ex-ante remuneration for approved resilience projects, maybe even performance bonuses for exceeding resilience targets.
What about utilities helping each other out in crises? Mutual aid.
That's important too. Recognizing and facilitating mutual aid groups, where distributors share crews and equipment during emergencies, is vital. Tariff mechanisms should ideally compensate for the costs involved in providing or preparing for such assistance, even if a predicted event doesn't fully materialize.
It sounds like a much more holistic approach is needed. Looking internationally, what are some standout best practices we can learn from?
There are quite a few useful examples highlighted. For risk assessment, the U.S. has toolkits for climate vulnerability assessments, and Laos worked with USA on a comprehensive assessment. Collaboration, disaster funds, clear emergency governance, and integrating climate plans are key. Mitigation measures like tree trimming and resilient urban planning must follow the assessment.
What about predicting and anticipating events?
Europe has its early warning system. Germany and the UK are integrating smart grid tech with advanced weather prediction. The U.S. Department of Energy uses big data and predictive analytics. GIS mapping tools are common. There's work on developing specific indices like the Interruption Risk Index, IRI, that factor in event probability and impact.
And for planning and managing the crisis itself.
The UK has detailed contingency plans. France focuses on infrastructure modernization and crisis drills. Italy encourages emergency plans. The U.S. emphasizes interagency coordination via FEMA, and California has advanced practices like controlled deactivations during fire risk. Regular drills like the hurricane preparedness training in the southeastern U.S. are crucial for testing response. Clear activation triggers and public communication are also vital.
How about coordinating the response when disaster strikes?
The EU promotes cross-border cooperation. Germany and the Netherlands use real-time communication platforms. Italy and parts of Spain mandate operational interaction between utilities and emergency services. The U.S. has well-established mutual assistance schemes through groups like APA and EEI, with defined procedures for resource sharing. Japan has a comprehensive disaster cooperation plan involving power, gas, telecom, defense forces, and local government with joint training. Brazil's recent mobilization for the Rio Grande do Sul floods was noted as a significant instance of national mutual aid.
Finally, what about regulatory incentives? How do other countries encourage these resilience investments financially?
Italy, since 2019, requires annual investment plans for extreme events, and more recently, introduced bonus mechanisms based on results like reducing outages or avoided emergency costs. The UK's RIO model allows companies funding for specific resilience outputs like flood protection or physical security. Germany offers subsidies for technologies like smart grids and storage. The US DOE provides grants, and FERC allows cost recovery for approved resilience investments through tariffs.
So mechanisms exist to make resilience financially viable for utilities if the regulation is designed correctly, and measuring success.
Italy measures resilience based on the reduction in disconnected users, using that IRI index. Bonuses are linked to performance across various categories. France and Spain are developing evaluation systems. The US DOE has tools for self-assessment using data and simulations. It's about moving towards quantifying and rewarding resilience outcomes.
Wow. We've covered a huge amount of ground today, starting with that specific blackout in Iberia, and ending with global best practices for building stronger grids.
It really shows the journey, doesn't it? From analyzing a single complex event, the Iberian Blackout, with its uncertain cause, be it technical failure or cyber attack, and its definite widespread impact, to understanding the critical global need for resilience in our electrical systems.
Especially as the source is stress, in the face of climate change and other emerging threats.
Exactly. It's not just about keeping the lights on day to day anymore. It's about ensuring the system can withstand major shocks and recover quickly.
And as we always say, being informed about these issues is the first step. Understanding the challenges and the potential solutions helps us all appreciate the importance of proactive measures for our critical infrastructure.
It's a collective challenge, really. Building resilience requires action from operators, regulators, governments, and an informed public, supporting those efforts towards a more secure and sustainable energy future.
A really crucial topic. Thank you for walking us through all that complexity. And thank you all for tuning into this deep dive. We hope you found it as enlightening as we did. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What stood out to you? If you found this valuable, please give us a like, subscribe for more deep dives, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration. Until then, stay curious.